So this is my reading, reflection, and commentary on the Proverbs. We are in chapter 31, and we are halfway through at this point. This is part 2, episode 2. Now, before we get into it, I'd like to start with a prayer. So, dear Lord, I thank you that I can be here today. And Lord, I have an observation that I'd like to share about experience. I brought this point up the other day in one of the episodes, but it is something that is relevant for today. That throughout the hours of the day, throughout the days of the week and the weeks of the month and so forth and so on, there are these patterns of life. Some are familiar, some are new. Some are frequent, some are infrequent. And I happen to experience an infrequent one this morning. And I have to wonder about it. I have to wonder why. Why such events, why such states of mind find me. And when I'm going through them, I wonder whether or not, or if perhaps I were to be stuck in such a state of mind, what my experience would be like from here on out. It implies that there is this sort of return, this home base, a stasis point of mind, the sort of the home base, the rootedness of mind that I know somehow, though I cannot articulate. And I think that this rootedness of mind has become a place that I can identify in prayer and in reflection. And it is for this that I am thankful. I'm thankful that I can have this relationship with you and come here and understand that despite what I may be feeling, the turbulence of experience is not enough to shift me off of my principle. And with this I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So we finished talking about, in last episode, at least on the last verse, considering the field. The field is this broad symbol for possibility, for action in the world, for planting a seed and having it grow, for thinking towards the future, for thinking beyond just ourselves. This chapter in general, chapter 31, is a prophecy of the mother of King Lemuel. And she seems to be quite wise indeed. And she happens to be defining what a virtuous woman is. A useful experience, no doubt. And all of these exercises are culminating in building a picture of this virtuous woman. She is somebody that tends to be selfless. She is strong in the sense that she orients her attention to bring people together. She is somebody that is valuable beyond just something that could be bought or purchased materially. She is somebody that knows how to perform in the world, to do action in the world, which might seem something quite simple. But in fact, I think to do action and to do it in a way that brings together can be quite difficult. It involves a lot of understanding and a lot of discipline, a lot of intentional action. But I'd like to continue now with verse 17. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. Now, the word loin is a part of the body on both sides of the spine between the false ribs, or the lowest part of our ribs, and the hip bones. It can often refer to sexual organs, and the images that this brings about is of sexual chastity. For to gird something can either mean to encircle a person or part of the body with a belt or a band, or to prepare oneself for something difficult or challenging. Now, I tend to favor the second part of that, although the first is applicable. Prepare oneself for something difficult or challenging. Now, why would I prefer such a definition? Because a virtuous woman, a woman that wishes to do good, I think ought to understand the purpose of her loins, as a man should also, but since we're talking about the woman. And she has a particular responsibility given the anatomy that she has. She receives the seed. She is the one that's responsible for nourishing and growing. And that responsibility ought not to be taken lightly. And surely what one must do in such a situation is to prepare, to train for such a situation, to want to have a child, but to prepare the mind and the body in such a way that when the child comes, she is mentally prepared and also physically prepared. And I think that there is a strong, in the virtuous sense, there's a strong attention and care towards that process of courtship, the process of surrendering to a man, perhaps. Maybe accepting a man is another good way to put it. And there has to be a strength and a strength of judgment such that she is able to manage such a difficult decision, but also such a lofty responsibility for nurturing the seed. She girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. So her arms, this vehicle for action, the tools by which the desires and the will of the mind is extended. I think here of preparation for a child. I think also of more of a minded, directed sense for which the woman understands if she is going to have a child. She understands how she is going to direct the child. The direction is, by extension, can be seen through the symbol of the arms. And so all of this involves care, involves attention towards the seed nurturing capacity, and towards the directed capacity. What is to be done with the fruits that are procured from such an experience? How is it to be directed? How is the child to be raised? She perceives that her merchandise is good. Her candle goes out not by night. So a new verse, a rather strange one. She perceives that her merchandise is good. Now, what is merchandise? if we had to describe the etymology of this term, so from the Old French, we have a word meaning goods, commodities, or wares for trade. Derived from the word merchand, meaning merchant. Latin roots, we have the meaning wages, pay, or reward. Related to mercs, meaning goods, commodities, or merchandise. There's the same root as seen in mercantile, commerce, and market. Now, a commodity is a basic good or raw material that can be bought, sold, or exchanged, especially one that is interchangeable with other goods of the same type. So there are certain characteristics of a commodity. One is standardization. One unit is essentially identical to another of the same kind, regardless of the producer. An example of which would be a barrel of crude oil. This is treated the same as any other of the same grade. Fungibility. Commodities are interchangeable, meaning that they can be traded on a global market without concern for who produced them. Gold, wheat, copper are fungible because they are the same between people. Bulk trade. Commodities are often traded in large quantities on commodities exchanges. And like, for example, where I live, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Types of commodities. There are hard commodities. These are natural resources that are mined or extracted. Examples would be oil, gold, copper, iron, or ore. Soft commodities would be agricultural or livestock products. Examples, wheat, corn, coffee, cotton, cattle. So, there's a couple ways I think that we can approach this. In previous verses, there is mention of merchants. There is mention of her productivity. She seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ship. She brings her food from afar. She perceives that her merchandise is good. So I'm thinking how this differs from anybody that would have some sort of merchandise, that would have some sort of good or commodity. So I suppose that there are plenty of ways in which somebody might want to try and trade something or sell something that is subpar. That there's a lot, I think, that goes into this idea of goodness. And I think that there is this implication that because she is concerned about good things, although the things that she produces may be simple, they may be commodities, or maybe they're not. Some good in the sense of some production, material production. She believes that what she is doing is for a good purpose, and that it is not just for money, let's say. That there is a value of the hard work or the good of the thing itself. Her candle goes out, not by night. This additional layer of attention and of care. In order for the candle not to go out at night, not only does it physically need to be positioned such that it won't be blown out, but also that there's enough wax to last the night. And so it implies that there is enough foresight on the part of this woman to identify when the candle may go out. she lays her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. So here we have two tools in mind, and a broader concept of the work, which is attributed to the feminine and traditional roles of the female in managing household affairs. So I think that there is an implication here about duty and work within a family. That this is something that must necessarily be done. It is for the virtuous person, the person who is concerned with clothing, repairing, fundamental, sort of the commodities of the household, if we will, such that the household can be supported upon it. It's supported on these more fundamental, foundational layers. And the practice, the procedure of going through all of this, I think there's an additional layer of participation through which not only the woman's virtue is developed, but also her relatedness to the family unit, family structure. And my mind goes on this tangent about all the things in my life that are procedural, that are necessarily procedural, and the ways in which, when I find myself in trouble, I think it is often because I do not recognize the importance of the procedure. Sometimes I get caught up in perhaps sometimes I get caught up in the goodness of the merchandise, let's say, and not necessarily the strictness of procedure, of just producing the merchandise. The intent is really the foundational bit. The discipline, the time, the attention, the procedure, all of this can iron out imperfections. But the imperfections are not an excuse to not put in the effort or put in the work. She stretches out her hand to the poor. Yeah, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. Now this is something that I think that I personally struggle with, reaching out to somebody that is in need of something. Now understanding that need is something that is an expansive term. It doesn't necessarily mean material, but it often does. There is something in me that I think at times challenges myself, that says if you are going to do something, then the heart must be on board. But I know through many experiences, and I know that there are many people out there who have had many experiences, that understand that there are good things that exist, and that there are good things to be had and good things to be done, through which the heart may not sometimes immediately respond. That it maybe is after, it is during, or even not at all. Sometimes I think that an overemphasis on the heart's agreement on various pursuits can lead to a selfish inclination. And this selfish inclination, I think, can wreck the intention of helping somebody in need. Now, why is this a good thing? She demonstrates self-sacrifice. It is likely that she feels the same as I do. She may feel that going through a process that is outside of her normal duties and responsibilities is something that that feels negative. It feels like she is being taken away from the status quo. The status quo is something she has found comfort in. She is now used to it. She doesn't have to change much. She doesn't have to expect things that are out of the ordinary, to challenge her. But the helping of the needy and all of the intricacies and potential risk, let's say, that is involved there, is one of those experiences that will take one out of their station and situation. But it requires of them that perception of good, just like in the previous verse. She perceives that her merchandise is good. She perceives that what she does is good. Now, of course, this doesn't always mean that what a person does is good. But perception of moving towards goodness, I think, is a good start at the very least to being virtuous. It's a necessary condition. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. So a verse about preparedness. So I'd like to talk about this preparedness and why it's important. In order to be prepared, to be ready for something to occur in the future, one must have both foresight, in the sense that they are able to identify what might be necessary in the future, and they must be able to execute on that procedural virtue that has been covered throughout many verses in this chapter. So what is this procedural virtue? It is, at the very outset, at the very fundament, it is the orientation of attention towards a specific series of tasks, but a procedure. There is a skill involved there, such that multiple steps must be taken, like the procurement of clothes or making clothes. There is the verse, she seeks wool and flax and works willingly with her hands. This implies that she has the skill to maintain a necessity for the family. Maintaining the necessity is, in a sense, maintaining the identity at its core. What do I mean by that? Well, if we think about a household, and we think about the identity of a household, we don't necessarily, though we can, the mind doesn't necessarily go to the physical supports of the house. Although it's important to maintain the physical structure, the household is something a little bit more than that. It involves physical presence, it involves relationships, it involves conscious experience. But just like the physical supports of the house, there are what we might call symbolic or spiritual supports that are necessary to maintain the identity of this household. There is also an added or spiritual layer to the procedural level, because the language here is not that she makes clothes for the individuals of the house. It says, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Now there's a way in which this obviously implies the individuals in the house. But there's also a way in which the broader identity is clothed in this scarlet, that it is protected because of prudence, because of forethought, foresight, and that procedural virtue. So going back to this idea of the identity of the household, let's break down the etymology of the word identity. So from the Latin, we have this idea of the state of being the same. Over time, as the medieval usage became prominent, we have the idea of time added into this, that there is an identity, that there is something that is the same, but is the same over time. And there's also, in our conception, as the term evolved, there's this idea that it doesn't just refer to sameness, but also to that which makes something distinctive or recognizable. What defines who or what a thing is or a person is. And so there's something quite fundamental about the household. There's something quite fundamental about our identity. And when we say sameness, when we say that there is something identifiable about us, like a thread or a spirit, that is something that somebody can grab onto and say, this is you, as opposed to somebody else, amidst the flux of our personal experiences and the variability in our emotions, the day-to-day experiences that we have, and how different one day can be to the next. Identity seems to be something that is difficult on one hand to get a good grasp of. But of course it exists. If it didn't exist, it would be impossible to identify it, to recognize it, to understand that that thing is different from something else. So I mentioned that there's a few things that can contribute to an identity. The people living in a house, the physical structure, the relationship of the people. And I think that there are levels to this. We could think back to our divine staircase. The divine staircase is one of these images that has multiple meanings, but each step is a new, almost like a Platonic exiting the cave type experience. It is a new perspective of reality. It is a new level of spiritual awareness and enlightenment. And so we can identify characteristics, I think, in this way as well, on different levels of the staircase. Some may contribute more readily to the identity of the thing. Others may more superficially so. Now, there's a way in which this is not an exact analogy to our image of the transcendent staircase, but it's something that I just thought about, and I haven't spoken of it in some time, so figured I'd bring it back here. There is some relatedness. So this concept now of having some things that contribute more, some things that contribute less, but they all contribute to a degree of sameness. They also may participate in other identities, but of the aspects of themselves that participate in something that is identifiable, this is our focus. I think about a government. I think about any sort of collective body that is funded by multiple different people. The identity, in our case, is formed because of the interactions among us and our contributions. Now, it would be a foolish thing to say that the state, the federal government of the United States, is the thing that is at my core. It is my identity. Because of course it's not. That would be a rather strange thing for it to be. It would be something that occupies my attention all of the time. If something were to offend or to insult or threaten the state, I would feel physically threatened. There would be a strong emotional response. There is a connection there, no doubt. And I'm not saying that an emotional response to some insult to the state is incorrect, but I'm saying that there is a level and degree to which our own individual identities are tied up with the state apparatus. The household is a more fundamental thing, but it occupies, I think, a similar type of image, in the sense that the the house that I am a part of, while it's an extremely important part about me, it's not the whole of me, I suppose. I contribute to its identity. And yet I, this person speaking, has an independent identity. The household of which is one of those things that contributes to my identity as I contribute to it. So there's that reciprocal relationship there. Okay, so keeping in mind this idea of sameness and of the different levels of contribution to identity, what are some things that contribute more to the identity of the household than others? Let's say that the television contributes to the identity of a household. Let's say it is something that the family gathers around. It's something that draws attention. And because it draws attention, because it is an object of usage, and it is within the physical structure of the house, and by the way, the physical structure also contributes to the identity, the television is then considered to have some contributory component to it. The question is, well, how much does it contribute? And I think it depends on the family. But I think it could also be said that without the people that are watching the television, then the television does not have the same degree of giving, because it requires a relationship within the identity for it to exist. Now, if the television was by itself, we could say maybe to some marginal degree that it contributes to the identity of the household. But again, it's marginal. The fact that it exists within the house is enough for it to participate in its identity. But if it does not involve human participation, its participation is much limited. And I think the same could be extended to any physical object in the house. If there is human participation with it, then its value increases in terms of the contribution to the identity of the household. So what begins to emerge is this network of things, some with more importance, some with less. But one of the foundational requirements for a household is human participation, human attention. It's fundamental. We could say also that the physical structure is fundamental to a degree. Almost like a prerequisite. And that is something that can exist outside of human participation, because the physical structure is built by human beings, yes, but not the human beings that will participate in the identity of the household. Or the term that I use to differentiate is home versus house. Of human participation, of the relatedness among individuals, we can expand this out into an even more complex and deeper web of relatedness. And this can be enhanced or reduced based on how people relate to one another, how we relate to ourselves. So if we say that then there is a woman in this household who possesses certain qualities, certain virtues, we could say prudence, we can say industriousness, we can say goodness, or at least attention towards goodness, faith, we'll say. We can say strength. And there is that procedural, which is wound up within the industry, that she has certain skills. What virtue that might be, we can call it industriousness, we can call it a motivation. At the bottom of it, it's likely attention. But not only can we draw a line to the identity of the household, but we can draw it to human participation, we can draw it to human individuals. And then there's a broad thing that begins to emerge as we break these down into little smaller and smaller nodes for which the woman's virtue, but specifically in this verse, the woman's clothing with satin, or scarlet rather, that what begins to emerge is this interrelated web. And this interrelated web seems to be symbolically a type of covering. It forms a structure. It keeps something bound. It prevents disunity. The cold is an insulting influence that would threaten the unity of the household. If there is this warmth, this scarlet covering, then the cold is kept at bay. The forces that would attempt to dissolve the identity are reduced. And so for this, I think we can add wisdom, because she understands how the various components here work. Now, a person need not understand it at all levels, of course, but at some fundamental level, enough to actually participate in such a way that it creates this protective web of the identity of the household. That is sufficient. So she is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Now, before we move on from this verse, I want to talk a little bit about why the word scarlet is in here. Now, scarlet, we can say, is a type of dye. It is a bright red dye. In the ancient world, it was expensive, vibrant, associated with luxury, the nobility. It was a sign of wealth, careful preparation, which we've discussed. So not only is there this idea of warmth, but also the aspect of consecration, dignity and consecration. Not only is it a garment that keeps warm, but also it is a garment that symbolizes dignity. It symbolizes something high, let's say, something good in a way. It could be characterized or contextualized as something is bad, but that is not our focus. In the tabernacle, in the furnishings of the tabernacle, in Exodus 26:1 and in Exodus 28:5-6, we have the garments of the priests being made of scarlet. And so there is this idea of dignity, again, and consecration. Now, if we define consecration, it means that something is made holy, declared sacred. It is devoted to the worship or the service of God. And if we are to add this on top of everything that we've talked about, it orients the identity of the household towards God, towards that divine unity, divine logos. A beautiful verse, really. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. So another verse about clothing, about covering. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. What is tapestry? Tapestry is a piece of thick textile fabric with pictures or designs, formed by weaving colored weft threads or by embroidering on canvas, used as a wall hanging or furniture covering. Now, what is a weft thread? A weft in weaving is the crosswise threads on a loom, over and under which other threads, the warp, are passed to make cloth. So I think the major thing here is picture, design, and that it is a type of covering. Now, why is it the case that a picture or a design is important, especially when we are considering a garment or something that is covering our virtuous woman? I had a conversation earlier today. It was sort of a one-sided conversation because the person that I was talking to is deaf, but they were communicating to me their thoughts about art and why they thought art was garbage these days. The reason that they gave was the internet. I made a comment by audio transcription about an opinion that I had that probably wasn't appropriate for this situation. It happened at work. I was dealing with a client. And the answer that I wanted to give was something on the order of, my initial thought was communism. And I knew at that time when the thought came up that wasn't the totality of it. The thing that I had said was that I didn't want to get drawn out into a larger or longer conversation than I had time for. And the reason is because if I said communism, I would have to clarify. I would have to give it context as to why I thought that in the first place. And then I would have to expand outside of it, because it's not just communism that I think is the problem, or is the issue. And in addition, there are plenty of things that I'm sure that I am unaware of that contribute to it. And I think that the internet does have some to do with why art has taken a downfall. It's also a contributor to why art is making a resurgence in some ways. There's sort of a catch-22 here. But since we were talking about pictures, since we were talking about design, and since I mentioned that my explanation for why design has gone downhill, I think the downhill part of this is fundamental. What is this downhillness? Where is it moving down from? That there implies this up, this place of betterness. That art used to have a stronger standing, or it was produced better, it looked better, it was experienced better in some way. And in what way do I mean by this communism that art had degraded to a certain point? So let's start here. By communism, I'm not sure I can give an extremely detailed intellectual argument why communism might have been the catalyst. I think there's probably a broad general decline in art. I think that there is a relationship between the changing attitudes towards religion. I think it has a relationship to the strength of religious institutions, and also the functionality of religious institutions, especially as we moved into the latter parts of the 20th century, and there were these various scandals that came out of the Catholic Church. I think and also the progressive atheism in our culture, the elevation of science to that high virtue status, that left the spiritual domain a bit underutilized, underexperienced. And when communism found its way into the modern landscape, a political and yet highly relational, spiritually relational form of social interaction or social ordering we found with it quite a rigid type of system that promised all sorts of ideological expression, but that expression was limited to quite a few, just to maintain the guise of the Garden of Eden that was to come, the workers' paradise. But in effect, it created a machine that was much more intolerant to the flourishing of human experience and of the spiritual life. So that means that there is something, in my estimation, about the spiritual life that provides us with a certain type of exploration of mind, an affordance that has the potential to change us, to modify our attention, to excite the heart, to inspire us, to prompt us to action. And when I see the first parts of this verse, she makes herself coverings of tapestry. I think about this notion of the tapestry, of why somebody would even go through the trouble. And there are many reasons why a person might drape themselves in a particular color or represent a particular logo. Some of them may not be all that interesting. But here we are being asked to consider a woman of purpose. This is a woman of virtue. So she takes care and puts attention into the things that she does. They are not entirely arbitrary. So there's a symbolic level in which we can discuss the meaning of the covering, and we've touched on it before. There's that covering in the verse before, in the sense that her behavior, even in the verse prior to that one, she stretches out her hand to the poor. She reaches forth her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Both verses have this idea of covering. She lays her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. All of this idea of grasping and throwing something over. It is certainly a womanly instinct to cover and to bring together. Of course, there are ways in which this is turned on its head and not made virtuous, but we are considering the virtuous woman. So symbolically, meaning to this woman, it is not just a mere covering, that there is some purpose to it. At least we have to imagine that if there is going to be some symbol to anything, that at least it requires the attention of the person that is participating in it. And this may occur at any number of levels. However, if we are thinking about our relationship to God and wish to articulate with Scripture such that we are trying to get the most out of life and of God's Word, then I think we have to imagine the highest potential form that this could represent. So where do we go from there? Do we talk about a particular pattern? Do we talk about a particular picture? Maybe, but there seems to be an endless number of pictures, an endless number of patterns that we can discuss. So it's probably not the best thing to do to just pick one, although some insights may come out of picking one. Rather, I think we should take this philosophically. If we say then that if we do not pick one out of the many possibilities, then we must ask ourselves the question, what is it about the one, the highest thing, that we would look for in any countless number of examples of women that meaningfully wrap themselves in some pictorial or patterned representation. And also understanding that this probably occurs at multiple levels, and not just the one in which she physically covers herself with something. So we can pick qualities. Qualities that have some meaning. Let's take difference. There are many things in nature. I live in the Midwest of the United States, and there are many things, if I were to just walk out in a state of nature, that I would not see. There are many colors that I would not see. Certainly there would be many colors that I do see, and depending on the time of year, those colors may be more variable or less. In the winter, it's quite uniform. In the spring and into the summer, there's a lot of variability. In the fall as well, there's a lot of variability. Different colors in the leaves, different flowers, different plants, etc. So difference is one of the ways that we discussed in the earlier verse that we identify things, of things having some different quality to it, some quality that makes it distinct from something else. There are ways that we can identify leaves that are apart from other leaves from the same tree by certain qualities. And there are also ways that we can identify a leaf of one tree from a leaf of a different tree of a different kind by other qualities, by shape, let's say. By the former, we can say by size, or by shape, although they share a general uniform shape. It may be altered to a slight degree. And so when we're considering virtue, we're considering goodness, and not difference for the sake of, in the negative sense, because we can all imagine situations where people wish to be different, to stand out from everybody else, and yet they bring upon them a negativity, a negative perception. I think about my behavior sometimes. I love playing music in my car, and I like to have it loud. And the problem is, I believe that I have enough discipline to turn it off when I am either have my windows down at a stoplight or I am driving by residential areas. But sometimes I leave it on because there's a song that I play, and this sort of thing eats at me sometimes. And I know that I should just turn it off, play it again when I'm driving, and there's enough noise to drown out whatever I'm listening to. In this way, there's that negativity of difference. Because out of all the people that are stopped at a stoplight, there may be one or two people that are listening to loud music. And while it may not be completely audible, in the case of a person with their windows rolled up, if somebody has their windows rolled down, they're probably going to be able to hear what's happening. So I don't mean this as we move through the verse, this type of thing. Difference, I mean, in the sense that what is being separated out is being separated out because it wishes to be separated based on its conception of self. That it doesn't wish to be uniformly related to what exactly? I suppose we can say other individuals, but that's not necessarily a good. I think we can say by position, since we just finished talking about that experience of the household. This type of person, the virtuous woman that is in charge of domestic duties in a household, or in charge responsible for different people. It could be the servant, the maid, the children, the husband. To wear a particular type of clothing that's unique to the individual, I think if this person is virtuous, when the attention is drawn to that difference, they are also drawn to the expression of the virtue, because this is how the person behaves. And so there's not only, this is the positive aspect of difference, first. And second, by her own self-awareness, she takes on difference to make her status known, let's say. Now, there's a danger here of becoming prideful. So the wearing of silk and of purple must be meant not to satisfy selfish desire or to prop oneself up for the sake of being above, but rather to submit wholly to God so that the woman may receive these virtues. I know that's a big statement, but such that she receives these virtues. And in the process of doing so, regardless of whether or not she's successful, becoming different, I think, is a sign, or becoming individualized, is a sign that either attention, the individual is ready for attention, I think I'm going to stick with this road, that the individual is ready for attention. And again, there's such risk here. And it also matters exactly what is being worn, because if this woman is going around wearing yoga pants that make her look like she's wearing a thong because she is in really good shape and she likes the way that she looks, this type of attention is not the attention that we want. Silk and purple must have a particular cultural meaning, that it is of a high quality. It doesn't imply that she's a prostitute. It doesn't imply that she's physically promiscuous. It implies that the care and the discipline that was necessary to find the dyes necessary to make the purple and to manipulate the material of the silk has been taken on and has been integrated into clothing. She makes the clothing, after all. She is that artisan that possesses this skill. So to throw on herself the highest, let's say, ability, the highest construction of her artistry, is something that reflects her virtue. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So, first impressions. I think it's often the case that when we see a particular couple, family, the way that they behave, the way that they carry themselves, says a lot about how they are at home, how they treat each other. Now, of course, there can be exceptions. People can have a public face and have a private face. And we always do, to a degree. But the point that I'm trying to make, let me say an example, because there's an example in my mind of a person that I saw with her daughters earlier today. the way that she carried herself, the way that she spoke, the way that her daughters behaved, the way that she cared for her daughters, had an idea in my mind, a question of wondering what her spouse did for work. Not as a competitive inquiry, but more so because of the question of why is this person, or rather, what about this person attracts another person? More specifically, what do the qualities that I have observed about this person, what do they do to attract another person? And it's likely that this other person would have similar qualities. Maybe temperamentally they won't be the same. But at least from a principled standpoint, they probably agree quite fundamentally. They probably have quite solid principles, foundational principles. And it is by these that they are drawn together. And considering all of that which we have said about this woman, of how she has come to virtue, necessarily these qualities, much like the clothing that she wears, will draw to her some attention. Some attention will be good, some will be bad. But much like the verse that we have read, verse 17, she girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. She is somebody that is willing to separate out the good from the bad, and to take the mate that she knows will be agreeable to her own virtues. And so by this, it makes sense that her husband is known in the gates, that he has a particular status. When he sits among the elders of the land, he is known. He is a person of a particular virtue himself. And she, by her virtue, has chosen him. Now, in order to expand this verse out a little bit, I think it's useful to discuss the unity between the man and the woman. I sort of hesitated in this approach because it's such a large topic. A large topic, and I'm not a married person. It's a beautiful thing, marriage. A difficult thing. But as much as we discussed the inner workings of this woman and her virtue, so too are the inner workings that connect two people together. We talked about identity earlier, and how interwoven everything is. Now, when we are talking about two souls and putting them together, you see, there's a way in which language here can be quite difficult, because I wonder if the soul is the best place to start with, or maybe the spirit is the best place to start with. The soul is something that I've conceptualized as our rock. It is the connection between absolute meaning and our experience, or our existence. It's what actually grounds our experience in meaning. It belongs to us, but also it is afforded to us by the Creator. And so when I think of marriage, sometimes I don't necessarily think about the soul immediately, but also I want to go to a place that's quite fundamental. But the spirit is a good secondary place, for it's not as fundamental as the soul per se. but it is that fundamental aspect of identity that we have been speaking about so far. Now, while there may be elements of the soul that are, or that can be, intermingled and intertwined, I wish to start with the spirit. Now, speaking of identity once more, speaking about the individual identity, I think the same as is with the household, as various elements contributing to the principled thing that it is. Also, in the self as well, there is this interplay and interaction. We can ask ourselves, well, what of these various forces make up who we are? And what is this spirit that exists within us? And of these things, I can identify a few to get us started. I think external influence has a big influence. Reciprocal experience, a reciprocal or an afforded experience, has a lot to do with who we are. The people that we interact with, the objects that we find around us, the beauty that we encounter, the nature, the climate, the culture. All of these are producers of information that we perceive. We are also producers of information that is perceived by the environment. Again, affording, at a relationship that is affording, that is reciprocal. That on one hand could be quite negative, on the other it could be quite positive, depending on a multitude of different circumstances. But I think it would be incorrect to reduce everything that we are to the environment. That there is something else about man and his, we could say, physical structure for now, that includes the body, includes all of his sense perception, but also includes the makeup of mind. And regarding the physical substructure, there is an important element here, no doubt. This is our causal layer through which we can describe mechanisms of things. But experientially, we don't necessarily think about it in these terms. How can we? We don't perceive the mechanical causes in mind. We observe them. I guess observe it by observing you perceive, but perceive in the sense of a more integrated type of perception, in the way that experience is an integrated type of perception. I don't observe particular nerve cells firing as I communicate this. I am deeply involved in thought to communicate this. And so the separation, the difference between experience and observation is something that I think is important. So today happens to be a new day. And like always, a new day brings new thoughts. I was doing a little bit of re-listening to determine exactly where I was. And on one hand, it's difficult exactly to remember. I believe that I was talking about the identity of marriage, of the unity of marriage. I hope I'm correct in that. And because I was speaking about this identity of marriage, it spurred thoughts about reflections on the identity of the individual. And of the individual, we are this integrated experience, this integrated machine, this integrated life that is composed of many different things. The first thing that I had mentioned, I believe, was the environment and all of the different types of information that the environment provides us. And so I wonder now where to go from here. I believe the last bit of recording had to do with the focus on experience as that is one of the most fundamental things about our existence. And it's a strange way to put it that way, because obviously it is. And maybe this is just a personal hang-up, but it would seem that this duality, or split, maybe, between the mind that is objective and the mind that is experiential is vast. And it ought not to be split, I suppose, but culturally we seem to have a dilemma between the two. While it's difficult to describe exactly what that dilemma is, I think I can say with confidence that the relationship favors the objective at the expense of experience. Now, I believe that this varies based on the individual and the situation. But all the same, I think we have found ourselves in a precarious spot. We have weakened ourselves experientially. We've lost aspects of ourselves. These ideas of ourselves, or of human nature, of the human being, of the human experience, what it ought to be, what it can be. And there was this discussion earlier about architecture, and how architecture has seemed to be in a bit of a decline. That's not to say that there is not beautiful architecture being built, but on the cultural level, that spirit of good architecture is largely absent in our society. Identity, difference, uniqueness, sameness. Etymologically, we went through this term, and there was a focus on this sameness, an internal sameness, the sameness that runs throughout that thing which makes it ironically different from other things. That internal consistency provides it with that base for which some mind can intuit what it is. So outside of the environment, what other components are there that influence identity, that influence the spirit of sameness that runs throughout us? I think one of the most important ones is our relationship to the divine. And the definition of the divine here, I think, is of the utmost importance. But also it is something that may change subtly, depending on where I am. And so I'll try my best to define it. Hopefully it's not too clumsy of a definition. The divine is on one hand, it's an architecture. It's an infrastructure, a network. On the other hand, it's an experience. That because of this divine identity, there is experience. Because of the identity, it affords experience. And we just happen to be this conscious experience, clumsily and confusedly riding atop of this system that seemingly, from the objective point of view, has no real purpose. It has some directionality to it. Purpose has found itself within the system, but experientially we understand that purpose abounds all around us. We are born into purpose. It's because of purpose that we are born. And I think it is by this purpose that a significant portion of our identity flows. And as I think about it, purpose is no easy thing. There are many purposes. In my own case, in my own experience, purpose has been such an illusory object that I've found it almost painful to consider. And yet, I've reached a certain age that I believe that I have a purpose, and that I have found some purpose. I participate in a purpose, and it is evolving gradually. And as it evolves, as I experience, I understand that as a willful agent, I have a role in this purpose. I have a part to play, and it is up to me how I play it. It is up to me which roads I take, how I wish to be. And there was an experience today that had challenged this purpose and this being of how I wish to be. And as of late, I've been reflecting and wishing to change the aspects of myself, I suppose you could say of the identity, that I wish to transform away, to sacrifice, so that internal consistency is something more grounded, something more principled, something more reliable, something more able to love, and to see and to forgive. But an event happened today during which I failed. And it stuck with me. It sticks with me now. And although failure is a part of life, it doesn't make it any easier when it happens. And I do find it amazing at the grace that there is. But also at the same time, I fear what a person who perpetually doesn't wish to accept what he needs to, that this person and his view of grace becomes distorted over time. And it is by his distorted view of grace that his purpose is severely affected. It becomes beyond his sight to transform himself, despite his desires. But of course, divine grace remains something that is outside of him, that can bring him back and transform him. So today is a new day. And it was an interesting day today. I'm thankful for this day. I thank God for this day. And I thank God that out of the multitude of experiences and emotions in this life, that there are those moments for which we are satisfied, but not in a way that leads us to arrogance or to ignorance, but satisfied with life because we agree with what has been given to us, with what we are presented with. So back to this verse, still talking about unity, I presume. Unity of the wife and the husband. Speaking of identity, I must be forgiven, I hope, as it will take me some time to get back into this discussion about identity. But I have this desire to close off this verse and move on to the next. not for the sake of expedience, but rather because I wish to speed along or hurry along that point of attention. And that is to get at the fact of the matter about what this symbolic representation between the husband and wife, especially in the virtuous sense, actually means. At what level are they unified? I think is one of the things that had initially led us down this path. And I had questioned the possibility of the marriage to reach the level of the soul. And I had a reservation about it. Initially I brought it up because I thought it was possible. And now that I think here on a new day with fresh thoughts, that it certainly is possible. But it is not possible, I would say, by the ceremony. The ceremony is something that sanctifies something a little bit different. The ceremony of marriage, I think, is meant to bring to attention the commitment that two people have towards the process of unifying. And unification, I think, at its core, at its deepest levels, reaches understanding to the heart, to the mind. The heart is part of the mind, but to the heart, to the rational side of our minds, to the spiritual. And even to the intuitive, I would say. The felt sense of being can be shared among people. And this ceremony is meant to, again, commit two people to the process. And it doesn't guarantee that these two people are going to be successful in their pursuits. But I think, speaking of unity, the importance of unity, the degree to which people that are married can unify, I think at the level of the soul it does happen. But I don't think it interferes with will, per se. Now, what I mean that on the fundamental level or layer, that the two people literally don't become two things. They still remain identities. They necessarily must do so because they are physical agents. If they weren't physical agents, and there's this male-female relationship with some of the necessary underpinnings that define the sex of the symbolic I'm speaking of here. Even if it was of this sort, there would be difference. But on the level that we exist, that physical layer, physical level, this experience, it is impossible to unify completely with somebody else. Now, as far as the soul is concerned, and the question being, well, where is this intersection? Where is it that when two people unify, their souls come into touch, into contact? And if the soul is to be this expression of being such that man is identified by a divine source or a divine intelligence, a supreme intelligence, then how is this relationship altered? How is it made better? How is it made worse, perhaps? All of the questions come into mind. Because there are even more, I suppose, on the nature of their confluence because of the unanswered question on the nature of the confluence between man and the divine entity. How we even conceptualize its existence. How we interact with it, etc. And we say that this is a necessity for that intelligent mind to be, is because of identity, it is because of purpose, it is because of thingness in general. that the thing that outlines thingness is an intelligent structure. It would seem to be a contradiction to identify thingness in an overarching state of nothingness. Now, it is possible on our level to see that a real thing may be the case where a conscious agent may exist, and there may be something before him. He understands this by observation, by interviewing people that are older than him before he was born, by dying and seeing the next generation, by inquiring about the formation of things in the land masses, and how time is discovered through the scars of the earth. I suppose that would then ask myself the question on the nature of thingness. If there may be a mind to see something, but the thing that sees it is temporary. And initially we said at the outset that it is necessary for something to see, for something to be, then it would make it difficult for us to maintain the position. Because at the bottom of that argument there is the implication that something can exist independent of mind. But if that is the case, and since we are faithful, and we don't believe in that narrative of thingness from nothingness, or in the extended symbolic sense, the good emerging from evil rather than evil emerging from good because of individual agency, there's something here, an important topic, especially as it relates to our position about evil, or let's just say its equivalence, since we started there. The equivalence is that evil and nothingness are related, or equivalent in a sense. Equivalent, maybe I have to break down nothingness or evil a little bit more, because evil implies agency. It implies action. And so in order for it to be a thing, it has to be this is where we find ourselves in this loop, because I would wish to say that if evil came from good, then it is the case that goodness, or the generative principle, perhaps, and just like we have a near synonym for evil, which is nothingness, the near synonym for good, I think, is creation, or the process of creation, the creative production that moves towards conscious experience, that has conscious experience. Perhaps that's speaking too much into it. But nonetheless, when we are here, we have plenty of room, plenty of ground to explore and to ask ourselves questions. But in the former example, there is nothing to exist. And nothing is absence of thingness. And if absence of thingness is all the way down, then there is no thing. And so there must be some thing in order for a thing to be a thing. And it may be said then, well, perhaps the first thing to be a thing was an atom. Perhaps it was an explosion of some sorts, like we think of in the Big Bang narrative, that there were conditions set just right in order for farther thingness to be created. But that doesn't necessarily speak to the purpose of this experience. That we could say perhaps that the purpose is not, there is no purpose. That the purpose is seen into the equation because of our perception, because we see reality through through subjective experience. And it is a possibility. But all the same, if we think about the way of something, there is always a certain layer of causality that we can identify. Meaning gives light to material, it gives life to processes that are otherwise a component of something greater. And it is by this structure of seeing, I think, that we do find indications that there is something beyond our experience. Now this sort of this argument that is flipped on itself, the one that we had before, through which a creative process can be entirely void of direction or conscious experience and just results from something that is random. The inference at the beginning seems to be a bit paradoxical and difficult to answer, but as far as I stand, it seems more reasonable to suggest that even if we defined a set of causes as being responsible, it is not random. And despite we being agents that have subjective experience, which is inherently limiting based on how we've sprouted in this environment, it still begs the question, well, it begs a few questions. It still begs the question of how thingness itself is intelligible, of how the possibility of organization may bleed into something that leads to a superintelligent mind that harnesses the power of this random acceleration of mass and energy, and itself becomes aware of its station. This type of system, intellectual system, is one thing. It loops in on itself. There is nothing outside of it, for it is. And so how exactly does this relate to what we were talking about? This concept of unity, being married. Well, I think we were on that topic of the soul and how exactly there is this relationship among two people, how their souls can touch, and having that road to God still be, I don't want to say intact, but still be something that is maybe undisturbed. Even this language I don't like, and I don't like it because when we think about disturbing the soul, it can come from many sources. It can come from the individual, it can come from the environment, it can come from somebody that we love. The passageway through which the divine information permeates our minds can be closed more and more. I don't think it can completely, but it can be to the point where one wishes to end life, to lose focus, to be embittered, to be stagnant, to fall into lethargy, and to forget what it means or why one is to be a productive agent. Admitting this is a possibility by the disturbance of some other, I think might be able to afford us a way of understanding, a way of interpreting this type of relationship. Again, the soulful relationship. If the condition is that it is impossible for it to wreck, to destabilize the soul of a person, and maybe I should not say it's impossible. There are certain ways that it may be possible, as I've mentioned, to end life. And as we know that hell is can be part of our conscious experience, and not just a process that occurs in some conception of an afterlife. I think it is possible for the mind to die, in a sense, to fall into nothingness from where it was. Doesn't mean it is nothing, but the road is entirely stunted, or the growth is entirely stunted. That transformational procedural process that exists within a strong, traditional, motivated heart is not able to be flourished by the divine information, the divine source, because of the block that occurs at the meeting between these two souls and the degree to which they are interacted, the degree to which they sacrifice to each other. Because the more that they sacrifice to each other, the more they will be influenced by each other. I think it's the same sort of experience as we sacrifice to God or any various number of idols, whatever it is. We get what the attention affords us. So perhaps it's not necessary to talk solely negative. It shouldn't be. After all, we are asked by the Proverbs to discuss a relationship to a virtuous woman. We're asked to reflect on the fact that by her virtue she has found a husband that's also a virtue, which is evident by his standing in society. And so, given what we've already talked about, even among the negative relationship, that there is this species of soulful interaction with another human being that exists. It has the potential for negative and the potential for positive. So now what can we say of the positive that would also expand our idea of this relationship? And perhaps I was going to say, well, maybe we should incorporate some of the wisdom from the next verse, but I'll save that for its own independent thing. The good that we've seen so far in this verse seems to point towards industriousness, attention on top of industriousness, wisdom on top of industriousness, or related, close relation to industriousness. And I think it is by these qualities that we can extend out many sub-qualities. By these principal qualities, maybe I should say, at the top. And so then, down there, at the entry point for which the divine finds us, we find this overlapping between us, between the two souls that are truly engaged in marriage and unity. And they see together. They see this divine information as it enters into their lives, because their lives are so intimately shared. And in the sense of the good, They work together to widen and to attend to this experience, and so they both are elevated because of their mutual efforts. And I think at the base, this is truly where the marriage flourishes. With this disposition, with this committed, willful desire towards that experience of unfolding and of growing and transformation and of transforming. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers girdles unto the merchants. So today is a new day. I've done my prayer in private, and it's a good day to begin a verse anew. I'm thankful that I did not leave off in the middle of a thought, as I sometimes do. And so I'm feeling a particular way. It happens to be a Sunday evening, and I had some good sleep this morning. It's a luxury that is much appreciated. So there's a thought that occurred to me, and it occurred to me yesterday and today as I read through this verse again, that I never wish to attribute more to a proverb than is actually there. But at the same time, the proverb is a key. The door that it leads to, and the environment that is behind the door, I think is in some sense guided. There is some structure there based on the words that are in front of us. But ultimately what we do in that environment is up to us. And I think even the conclusions that we come to are up to us. Certain verses have more leeway than others. It restricts our experimentation more than some others. But sometimes we're left open and free to choose and to go whichever way we will. And so I'm not too sure how this verse is going to go. I have this desire to experience something strong and divine. And at the outset, it's difficult to see how I will get there with this verse. It's not all the time that I have this experience or this feeling. Sometimes I read a verse and I think to myself, I hope that I can capitalize on this. I hope that I can bring it to a place that moves me closer to God. But nonetheless, she makes fine linen and sells it. So starting with the first half of this verse, there is a consistency here, a relatedness to a previous verse. She makes herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. She makes fine linen. Now, fine linen brings up an image in my mind of a material that is rare. Perhaps it might take a degree of artisanship to produce a clothing made out of fine linen. And so by going through this process, she is exercising a skill that not everybody has. There's inherent value in the discipline and in the procedure through which she operates. So that in and of itself, the procedure of discipline, attaining a skill, and then selling it, I think is plenty of fruitful territory for us to explore. And also, since this is my exploration, I will probably be involving aspects of myself. The first place that I want to go is to a thought about my childhood and into young adulthood, it's quite easy to imagine situations or behavior from the adult perspective and attribute what we wished for ourselves when we were younger, the type of discipline that we wish we could have exercised, the type of place maybe that we could have gotten to after having some lived experience in the world. But they always say that hindsight is 20/20. And it's not a matter to necessarily be melancholic about, but an interesting reflection nonetheless. There was a pattern when I was younger for being a bit lazy, inattentive. And there were causes for this inattentiveness and this laziness. It surely can be argued the justification for inattentiveness and for laziness, that perhaps the causes were not sufficient to manage such behaviors. In the minds of some, perhaps they are justified. But this is not really a productive reflection. I think it is more so a useful, productive reflection to think about the state as it is. And the reason that I went back to my childhood and identified this pattern is because we are all products of our childhood. We may go through different transformations at different points in our lives, and hopefully we do. And hopefully these transformations bring us closer to God. I've had a few. I've had some that have brought me away, and some that have brought me closer. And as I stand now, I believe that as I try to change myself, I am transforming for the better, though I fail often. But getting back to the principle, there is something within what we consider to be laziness, what we consider to be inattentiveness, that has a seed of evil in it. That it is the enemy of enterprise, of industry, of effort, of overcoming challenge. And there are many reasons for that, and much like the causes, I'm not sure that they are all that important. We may find a particular example for which the cause is useful and interesting to reflect on. But the principles, I think, will suffice. Understanding the structure of this is important. If we imagine ourselves, or if we imagine this woman that does the opposite of this, we explore her virtues and then flip them on their head, I think what we would find is a woman that is destructive. She wishes against solid relationships. She wishes against productive behavior. She wishes against understanding, learning, and participating in a skill, a valuable skill. And I imagine all of the different possibilities that may lead one to such a state. Some may garner sympathy from people, others may not. But moving away from the negativity, moving into this industriousness, and I think there are plenty of words around which we can revolve this experience when we observe her to be making fine linen and selling it. What does this do for us? What does it do for our soul? What are the components of the rational mind and of the heart when they are engaged in such a thing? Much like our former example, I think there can be many things to be said about the reasons why she makes fine linen and sells it. And just by the basic context of this verse, without anything else in chapter 31, we can find ourselves in negative territory, potentially, thinking about one potential road or example why she might be doing this. But in the broader context, we are discussing the virtues of a woman who is married to this king, King Lemuel, or to be married to him. Maybe that his mother would like him to find in a woman. Again, the first verse in this chapter, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. So we have this hypothetical virtuous woman. Verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies. Again, bringing back this idea of value being something that is much more far-reaching than the currencies through which we exchange material value. And it's interesting that we have both in this verse. We have the participation in something that is well beyond material value, but it is transmitted into material value. And on the surface, perhaps it seems fairly straightforward. All of us understand this to a degree. But it's my desire now to reach into this and rip it open. And have there be no choice but to give me the motivation to make the decision that every waking moment of my life, of my experience, I'll have my mind geared towards that goodness and that productive energy. Of course, there will be moments of failure. Fatigue will set in, and there will be challenges. And I think part of these challenges that arise are the ends. What we aim after. Much like I mentioned with the potential for negatives, interpreting this verse out of context. We could see a person that desires to learn a skill to make fine linen, to sell it for money, to have only that narrow set of value. Now, inadvertently, they had gone through a larger value set to acquire this money. But it was only for the sake of these rubies that they sacrificed, not for the sake of God. And herein lies, I think, our first bit of learning, strong learning. The difference in the ends, or the high point of attention, when the mind looks down the road, whether it be into the future or strategically imagining where their productive hand should rest. If at the end of that sight, all they see is money piled in a vault or stored as numbers in some accounting firm, with some stock portfolio, then God has been missed. attentively. But my question is, well, what does that mean? If we think about value, God has value. God creates value. God is not just rubies. God is an intelligent being, a being of direction, a being of beings. And since we are coming out of a topic of talking of identity, it's easy to see how getting caught up in the partiality of the whole of something can cause short-sightedness, because all we consider is the partiality of something. If we consider the partiality of a skill, we will only be mediocre at developing and maintaining that skill. So what is it then about this end, about our vision upwards towards God, that causes us to find that inexhaustible fountain of motivation, of lust for life, let's say? In some sense, it's a desire for purpose, for ultimate purpose. Can we say in the same breath that what we desire is ultimate satisfaction? I don't think it could be so simple. We would easily fall into pride if that were the case. The heart is certainly along for this journey. And the mind, the rational side of us, is also a traveling companion. Neither one of them exactly takes the driver's seat. In a way, our purpose is to be seen. It is to be grasped, followed, but it requires certain things of us. Speaking of good purposes, I think that in order to be able to see it, in order to participate in it, we have to sacrifice. We have to understand that there will be those restraints that are shifted and adjusted to ensure a successful outcome. Our will be modified. Free to choose, free to accept. And once we accept, we find ourselves in that lane. We can step on the gas. We can make the fine linen. We could sell it, no problem. She makes fine linen and sells it, and delivers girdles unto the merchants. Now, what does this term mean, girdles? In my mind, what comes up is an image of a belt. So, if I Google girdle, a girdle is a form-fitting foundation garment that encircles the lower torso, extending below the hips, and worn often to shape or for support. It may be worn for an aesthetic or medical reasons. In stricter terms, a girdle is something that encircles or confines. And when I read this verse initially, this is what I had meant about potentially contributing something that was more than the verse was offering me. But I ought not to think that way, because I want to use this definition of something that encircles or confines. But I want to stay true to what is being said here, so we will follow a few steps that will then lead us to the symbolic territory. So delivering these girdles unto the merchants, a belt for them, something that they can take with them to sell to the next town, to the next city, to the next peoples, whatever. We can say that the merchant may wear this girdle, or they may not. Somewhere along the chain, though, somebody will be wearing these girdles. And for this small action, I consider confinement. We just spoke of it but a minute ago when we were talking about will and about transformation, and how, although I assert that we have free will, our will is defined. And it could be asked, well, how can you have freedom of will if it's defined, if it's certain? Because while there may be things about our will that are beyond our control, again, we may wish to be able to transform into a bird, but that is beyond reality. That is beyond our ability to do so. We may do so in symbolic terms, and broad sociological terms. We may transform into a bird somehow. Some thought, idea, or product may extend its wings and fly over the whole of our society. But we ourselves as physical agents cannot just jump out the window, I happen to be on the 4th story, and fly away. There are definite constraints there. In fact, I would die if I did so. So this idea of confinement has a rich symbolic purpose, especially as it relates to will, especially as it relates to our virtuous woman who has a strong will, who is industrious and productive, generative in her life's pursuit. And so why would she make something that would confine another? A virtuous person, a good person, would design a confinement in the sense that the will is confined or constrained such that it gives only those affordances towards the good, or towards farther production of good things. Now, the relationship to the physical structure of the girdle, of course, is that it confines the waist. It may hold the pants up, let's say, if it's a belt. And there's a underlying symbolic significance of why we wear clothes in general. To preserve modesty is one. Safety, warmth. There are many things that go into this. Some of them are not necessarily symbolic. But all the same, they participate in this idea, however small it may seem at the outset, this idea that we all participate in a manner that is consistent. We are not like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, who is this half man, half beast that needs to be tamed. The girdle to the beast is something unknown, for he is not confined in the way that a civilized man is confined. But when he is given that girdle, when he is given the confinement, he becomes a participant, again, at a degree of a small level in the case that we're talking about here. A participant in some level of uniformity that affords particular types of relationships. The relationship in this case is providing our virtuous woman with money, with rubies. And that there's this affordance based on her skill set. But it's also participating in the broader, I don't want to say broader uniformity, but broader constitution of understanding among people, such that they are able to relate to each other better. So with this, I think I'm going to end this episode here. I'll continue next time with verse 25. And this will be our last episode, I believe, however long it's going to take us. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 verses, I believe, left. And then after this, we'll be moving on to Plato for I'm not sure how long, it may be a year or two. And then we will return to the Bible. I may take some breaks in between here and there to return to the Bible, but prayer is going to be a necessary thing to get through Plato without having Scripture along for the ride. But anyway, ending this episode here.